What's up guys, welcome back to the channel, and today is August 24th, also known as Mamba Day, so I'm pretty sure you could have guessed, we're going to be talking about Kobe Bryant, and more specifically, we're going to be looking at the 3 biggest Kobe Bryant myths and trying to debunk them once and for all. Now, the first big Kobe myth is that he was an inefficient player. Now, before I do debunk this myth, I do want to clarify, Kobe sometimes, he would take very difficult shots, and his shot selection, it could be questionable sometimes, but that does not make you an inefficient player. And prime Kobe from 2000 to 2013, when he was a perennial all-star and one of the best players in the NBA, shot 45.5% from the field. Now, if you compare that to the NBA average, which is 45.1, Kobe was slightly above that. And that 45.1 number, that takes into account power forwards, centers, and role players who shoot 3 to 5 times a game. Now, if you know Kobe, he was a volume scorer. So I think it's only right to compare Kobe to the other volume scorers of the early to mid 2000s. And the first player we're going to take a look at is Vince Carter, and Vince's absolute prime was from 2000 to 2007. And when you take a look at Kobe and Vince's shooting numbers side by side, they are very similar. Kobe does have a higher field goal percentage and a higher true shooting percentage, and when it comes to effective field goal percentage, they are both tied at 48.6. Another volume scorer in the mid-2000s was Tracy McGrady, and T-Mac's absolute prime was from 2001 to 2007. And when you compare his shooting splits to Kobe Bryant, Kobe has the edge in all 3 categories. Now, another great volume scorer in the mid-2000s was Allen Iverson, and his prime was from 2000 to 2008. And very similar to the T-Mac and Kobe comparison, Kobe sweeps Iverson in all 3 of these categories. Now, the last great shooting guard who was a volume scorer in the mid-2000s was Ray Allen, who's one of the best shooters in NBA history. And when you compare his and Kobe's numbers, they are very similar. Now, I would say Ray Allen, he does have the edge on Kobe, but Kobe is not far behind in all these categories, and that's one of the big misconceptions about Kobe, the fact that he may not be as efficient as some of these elite shooters. That doesn't mean he's an inefficient player, because as you saw in the Ray Allen comparison, he is still very close to Ray Allen's shooting splits, and I don't think you'd find a single person in the world who says Ray Allen is an inefficient scorer. Now, another big problem with people calling Kobe inefficient is them comparing stats from the early 2000s to the late 2010s. And if you know anything about the early 2000s, it is classified as the dead ball era, and the spacing in that era was absolutely atrocious. And compare that to the modern NBA, and it's not even close. The early 2000s, that was a much more defensive era, and it was way harder to score. And if you actually rank the top 10 slowest paced seasons, the mid 2000s, they have 6 of the 10 slowest seasons. Now, even with Kobe playing the slowest paced era, he was still able to achieve some amazing scoring feats. And when we look at the most 30-point games, shooting over 50%, Kobe ranks 8th all time. When you look at the most 40-point games, shooting over 50%, Kobe ranks 3rd all time. And when looking at the most 50-point games, shooting over 50%, Kobe ranks 3rd all time. So I don't think an inefficient player could be in the top 10 of all 3 of those lists. And I hope all this information and context shows you guys that Kobe Bryant, he was not an inefficient player. And the second myth we're going to take a look at is that Kobe, he was not a good clutch time player. Now, if you define clutch as the last 24 seconds of a game and how that player performed when shooting those late game shots, I will admit Kobe's shooting numbers, they're slightly below average compared to other NBA superstars. But in my opinion, being clutch, it's more than just the last 24 seconds of a game. I think a real good indication of being a big clutch time player is looking at the 4th quarters of playoff games. Now, when you look at Kobe's 4th quarter numbers from 2001 all the way to 2003, they're absolutely off the charts. He averaged 8 or more points in all those playoff runs, and he did that on a very good shooting efficiency, and he actually ranked 1st in the NBA in 4th quarter scoring all 3 of those postseason runs. And later in Kobe's career, when he made his 2nd championship runs from 2008 to 2010, he was also extremely good in 4th quarters, as he ranked 1st in 4th quarter scoring in both the 2008 and the 2009 playoffs, and in 2010, he was 2nd in the NBA. And looking at all of Kobe's 4th quarter numbers combined, he led the NBA in 4th quarter scoring 5 different times, and he won a championship in 3 of those seasons. And I think everyone knows the NBA Finals, that is the biggest stage, and when we look at Kobe's clutch time numbers in the finals, they're also super impressive. And those numbers alone, they're good enough to make the case that Kobe is indeed a clutch time player. But if you compare him to what some people say is the most clutch player of the 2010s, which is LeBron James, Kobe actually has the edge in points scored with 78 to LeBron's 76, and Kobe shoots way better from the field, shooting 45.2% to LeBron James's 30.8%. And keep in mind, LeBron James, he has been in 9 NBA Finals, and Kobe only went to 7, and Kobe still had more clutch time points and shot a way better percentage than LeBron James. And if all this data wasn't enough for you, here's one last point to nail it home. Since 1997, when the fourth quarter stats were recorded, Kobe has the single highest points total for fourth quarter scoring at 715. Now, after all the information, I think it's pretty obvious that Kobe, he was indeed a very clutch player. Now, lastly, we have the biggest Kobe Bryant myth that is probably the dumbest myth for any player in NBA history, and that is that he was carried by Shaq to the first 3 championships. So let's take a look at Kobe and Shaq's first title run during the 2000 season. Now in this playoffs, Shaq, he averaged 31, 15, and 3 on 56% shooting. Kobe averaged 21, 5, and 3 on 44% shooting. Now, I'll be the first to admit, Shaq, he was definitely the best player on this championship run, but averaging 21, 5, and 3, that is nothing to be ashamed of, and that's definitely not getting carried. Now, a lot of people will say that Kobe was carried in the finals because he only averaged 15.6 points per game, and at face value, only averaging 15 points per game, that does look pretty bad. When we take a look at the context surrounding this series and the fact that Jalen Rose, he purposely injured Kobe, and Kobe actually missed 1 full game, that provides much needed context to this series. Also in Game 4, Kobe took over when Shaq fouled out, and he had the game-winning tip-in. So even at this young age, Kobe was definitely capable of carrying a team down the stretch and leading to a victory. And the Shaq carried Kobe myth, it only gets weaker as you advance in their playoff runs. As in the 0-1 playoffs, Shaq averaged 30, 15, and 5, but Kobe, he would put up 29, 7, and 6. And when you look at who was the best scorer by round, in round 1, Shaq edged Kobe out, but in round 2, Kobe was actually the leading scorer of that series, and in the Western Conference Finals, Kobe was once again the leading scorer of that series. Now Shaq, he was the leading scorer in the finals, but looking at all 4 of these playoff series, they both led the team in scoring 2 separate times. And if you compare Kobe's 0-1 playoff run to other NBA legends' best playoff runs, it's a pretty interesting comparison, looking at LeBron's 2013 run, Magic Johnson's 1982 run, and Larry Bird's 1981 run. And it really is funny that only one of these players has the narrative that they were carried to a championship, when you could argue Kobe actually had the best playoff performance out of all 4 of these players. And moving on to the 2002 playoffs, Kobe and Shaq, they once again had very similar numbers. Shaq averaged 29, 13, and 3. Kobe averaged 27, 6, and 5. And again, I would say Shaq, he was the better player. But honestly, Kobe, he was not far behind. And once again, if you look at the round-by-round scoring, Kobe outscored Shaq in 2 out of the 4 rounds. And I think one very important thing that doesn't get talked about enough is the fact that Kobe, he was the go-to guy down the stretch, and Shaq, he was looked at as a liability due to his poor free throw shooting and the fact that he couldn't create his own shot and he couldn't shoot the outside jumper. Now, once again, I will stress, I think Shaq, he was the better player in the 2002 playoffs, but in 2003, I think that would change a little bit as Kobe took his game to the next level, averaging 37 and 6 to Shaq's 28, 11, and 3. And during this year, Kobe finished 3rd MVP voting, which was higher than Shaq, who finished 5th. And in the 2003 playoffs, Kobe was the leading scorer of this team throughout the postseason, averaging 32, 5, and 5 to Shaq's 27, 15, and 4. So hopefully all that information I gave you guys, all those stats, all those facts, all that data, that proves once and for all that Kobe Bryant, he was not carried by Shaq to those 3 championships. And if you see anyone using one of these 3 myths, I hope you guys reference my video, show them some screenshots of my graphics, and just end all 3 of these myths that Kobe was an inefficient player, that he wasn't a good clutch time performer, and that he was carried by Shaq to his first 3 championships. So with all that being said, I hope you guys like this video, and if you haven't already, I would appreciate it if you subscribe. But with that being said, thank you guys for watching, I'll see you guys next time.